Hello. Hello again on our channel. Microsoft audits, we thought they will disappear when everything will move to the cloud, when Microsoft will bring everybody to Azure and sell only Microsoft 365. Many thought even in 2014, when I had a very heated discussion with one cloud enthusiast, that audits will disappear. Many thought at the time that this is what's going to happen. Nevertheless, we are in 2026, and potentially, if you watch this past 2026, it may still be a fact of life that Microsoft continues auditing businesses for licensing compliance. And the most interesting trend right now is we expected the audits to be honest, to also reduce drastically, because Microsoft did not audit organizations in Europe, except for service providers, for quite a while, a few years. Now, my team is dealing with 2 clients in Europe under a Microsoft audit, which is a big surprise. It came back as a massive surprise. However, if you look at what they are looking for now, it may explain why the audits have returned. For the end user organizations, and I will cover both aspects for you today. So if you're from a service provider, we'll talk about audits, intricacies and specifics that are relevant to service providers, but I will also talk about end user organizations because suddenly they're back in scope. In Asia, in North America, and in Europe. And in all these regions, our team is now helping clients to pass through Microsoft audits and pay less than it would have been if there was no control and no audit defense. And end user organizations are now in an interesting focus. It started at the beginning of this year. You may have heard about it already if you watch the space. Microsoft is looking at tenant-wide services. I was trying to remember the name of this. It's a service that you enable as an online service, cloud service, which we thought, why would they audit that? But if you enable it for just one user in your organization, many of those services are automatically enabled for every single user. And Microsoft does not provide anything out of the box that helps you just to what's the word I'm looking for? Precisely assign those services to particular users. You have to put controls in place. You have to apply policies, and not every tenant-wide service has easily applicable policies. And this is the reality. So this is the new message. Buy more E5 because everyone in your organization now uses one of those services, although you never intended that to happen. And I will walk you through each and every step of an audit. Again, talking about specifics for service providers and specifics for foreign clients. Each and every step. We've done this, I lost the count, between 100 and 200 times already, if not more. So everything you'll hear from me today is basically what we learned in years and years and years of this practice, protecting organizations from Microsoft audits, minimizing the penalties, and in many cases, completely avoiding penalties via different methods. And one thing I want you to understand from the very beginning is that it does not matter at which point in the audit process you start taking control, but it affects how much you can save. And any audit starts well before the audit, the actual audit. Any audit defense, any audit readiness begins well before. So everything you learn today, if you're not in an active audit process, you can apply today to your estate, to your M365 tenant, to your service provider infrastructure, and reduce potential penalties by fixing errors are made, by fixing those errors, those mistakes, those misconfigurations, and applying certain policies, and preparing the documents and everything else for a potential audit. And as I said, they happen. There is really no way around it. And I would love to say that there is a way to avoid an audit completely. Unfortunately, it's a combination of randomness plus some sort of insights nowadays selected by AI. This is how vendors, including Microsoft, choose their audit targets. You can be next. It may not happen to you this year, next year, in 3 years, unless you're a service provider. Unfortunately, service providers undergo a cycle of consistent audits from Microsoft. If you're an end user organization, depending on the size, it may or may not happen. But if there's anything in your licensing estate that doesn't look right, for example, if you only procure online services and you have no server licenses, it's a logical configuration these days. But Microsoft doesn't see you buying server licenses, you only buy online services licenses. They may flag you for a potential audit. So without further ado, I think it was a pretty good intro. I hope so. Let's have a look at the audit. And then I want to begin with the differentiation between the end user audits and service provider audits, because service providers need to understand the additional risk compliance audits from Microsoft carry for service providers themselves. An end user organization is audited at a point in time, and service providers as well. But the difference in how the debt is calculated is massive. Because again, for everyone the audit is point in time, and an end user organization is assessed at that point in time, their deployment, their usage versus what licenses that organization has. With service providers, there's an audit window going back in time. This is an old slide I put together a few years ago. It's still relevant. Just don't look at the year numbers. It doesn't matter at all. What they do is they measure the current consumption in the service provider estate, and then they extrapolate it to the previous months. And that basically accumulates over months and months and months back in history for a service provider. So historical data is a thing that is different. Historical view, historical extrapolation is the thing that is different for service providers versus end user organizations. So I really needed to explain it to you today. So if you're a service provider, you're watching this video, you received the Microsoft notice, or you're afraid that one day you will receive a Microsoft notice, or they send you a self-assessment request. You need to understand this difference between service providers and end user organizations. Historical view is something that will always be assessed in a SPLA audit. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them in the chat as usual. This is a live event. And again, for service providers, what's important, very important, and less so for end users, still please pay attention to any evidence that shows when you started using a certain service or you deployed a certain server, because for service providers that will be included in the report. For end user organizations, it may be a point to discuss. For example, if you enabled Entra ID P2 for one user, because only one user has an E5 package, Microsoft 365 E5, and everybody else in the organization has Microsoft 365 E3. That P2 functionality is enabled for every single user, even with E3. And therefore, there will be a negotiation where Microsoft will say, we'll use this as an argument, for example, that they've seen that you have been using this feature for 12 months. You're going to have a completely different discussion if it's a longer period, depending on whether that's a longer period or a short period of that. Well, probably unintended use, but this is just how it works. So historical data is vital for service providers, absolutely vital. and could be important for end user organizations that are stuck in the Microsoft audit process. There are two phases in every audit. And again, I will repeat that it really doesn't matter when you engage with a professional audit defender or you decide to do it in-house. You can save, you can reduce your penalties. But the earlier you start, the better will be the results. And those two phases of an audit are the data gathering and analysis performed by an assigned independent, and I'll go on the tangent now and explain the actual value between the word independent auditor, typically one of the big four, EY, PwC, Deloitte, and KPMG, typically one of those four. Honestly, we've never seen anybody else performing those audits on behalf of Microsoft anyway. As long as those are official audits with the proper notice and everything, and not some sort of audit in disguise that is run by an interested party who's a Microsoft partner. That's a different matter. So in the first phase, that independent auditor engages with you, asks you to collect the data. They don't collect the data themselves. We'll talk about it. It's a long life. Please bear with me. And then they analyze the data. And then they discuss the findings with you. You may challenge them. You don't have to accept them. Again, we'll get back to that. And then when they finish their job, and there's no more you can negotiate with them at the technical level. You're not negotiating commercials with them. They are not even allowed to show you monetary values. You will only see the number of licenses you're missing. And then they hand this over to Microsoft. And Microsoft doesn't do technical analysis. So it's all technical analysis is strictly with the independent auditor. What you do with Microsoft is you negotiate the business case, the circumstances, the ability to pay, alternative solutions. For example, buy more Azure and don't pay penalties. That's one of the most frequent resolutions. And I'm not saying you should go for it. Just saying that it's one of the most frequent resolutions. And even at the first stage, and not even, let me rephrase this. Let me repeat this. The cost reduction, the penalty reduction happens during every single step. At the initial notice, all you need to do is just basically recollect yourselves. You need to understand you don't need to stick to strict timelines that are imposed. You have a 30-day period from the notice before the audit begins, because Microsoft has to notify you in the 30-day period. Take control of the timeline. Think about how you're going to react. Gather your team. 30 days is a good time frame. And by the way, if they insist on a meeting in 10 days, you can push back and say you have to notify us 30 days prior. Sorry, Microsoft, not ready. Do that. Push back. The most important point on this slide is take control of the timeline. Absolutely take control of the timeline. At this point in time, there's no data exchange. It's just basically the preparation stage, you calling experts in audit defense, talking to your IT department, understanding where you are, talking to your legal reads the notices. It's that phase. So nothing yet is happening. However, what you can already do at this stage is to tell your IT department at this point, high level, to check that the house is actually in order. And I will repeat those things during this whole event, but just to give you like an initial picture of what I'm talking about, if you're an end user organization, check your multi-tenant services at this point. See whether there is unintended use of features that are not licensed. See what you can do with it. Apply policies. It's better to apply them at this point. Microsoft doesn't require you a change freeze. They're not IBM. They don't tell you stop changes until the audit is done. You can't do anything. There's no change freeze, so-called change freeze, where you're not allowed to change anything. You found a mistake, fix it now. Yes, there was a historical mistake, but you will show that you are implementing active measures to sort out the situation. It will put you in a better position. It will. I want to go back to this. With service providers, recheck all your servers, all the software running, security groups, users allowed to access terminal services. Start checking that at this point. You may not yet know what you're doing. You may not yet understand completely, where the gotchas are. Watch videos on our channel, read articles on our website. There's a lot of information around what exactly you need to check. Just start that kind of putting your house in order. Sweep it, wipe it, mop it. Do the due diligence at the notice stage and calm down. Audit is not pleasant, but it's totally possible to go through it with minimized damage. Then there's an NDA stage. And depending on the agreement that you have, so you check your agreement, because Microsoft agreements are standard, but they keep changing. So they're more or less standardized, but there may be different terms. And if it does not limit the timeline for you to recheck and re-verify the non-disclosure agreement with the auditor, then you are more flexible. Just try not to upset them too much. Don't push it too hard, but take your time and review the NDA. It's absolutely your right. Moreover, what Microsoft did in one of the recent versions of the agreements is they said you actually have the right to negotiate an NDA with the independent auditor, but you have only 10 days to do it. So check your agreement, because then if you go beyond 10 days, you'll be in an interesting situation potentially. Still, our clients take longer sometimes, and we haven't seen a real aggressive pushback on that time frame. You have the right for that NDA. Use it, consolidate it. Absolutely, why not? Just align the NDA to your actual requirements. Check a few things. Then you have the kickoff meeting, and here's what I want to start re-emphasizing multiple times. The motto: do not overshare. Respond to the questions. Tell stories in response to the questions. Do not go on a tangent, and do not accidentally give them ideas. And I'm not teaching you to hide anything. We're not talking about hiding. Remember that, first of all, audits have a scope. And if you're a service provider and they audit you, the scope is only your service provider estate, nothing else. They will start asking questions about what's your internal infrastructure. If it's outside of the SPLA scope, then I'm sorry, that's not their concern, because it's outside of the audit scope. So you may mention it, but I wouldn't give any details, and I would strictly push back and say, this is a SPLA audit. We're only giving you data about our SPLA infrastructure. Colocation, hardware rental, outside of scope. Don't share. And at the initial kickoff meeting, really, your role is to listen to the auditor. But listen carefully, ask questions, make sure everything is absolutely clear to you from what they're telling you. If it's a service provider, from hosting scenarios, so you can align them with your hosting scenarios, so you'll be speaking the same language when you talk about scenario 4, for example, with the auditor. If you're an end user, there may be, because everything is changing now about online services, there may be new information, new points. Still, listen, clarify, ask questions. You're in a listening mode right now. And I would not send them any questionnaires. It's one of the files they'll give you as a questionnaire. I would not send them any questionnaires. I would not share any data. At the very maximum, I would only suggest walking them through your business, what your business does, how it operates. Then again, still be careful with, for example, listing all your business entities, unless you already clarifying the scope of the exercise. Minimal information, only relevant information. Again, I'm not touching you to hide any. Sorry, I'm not teaching you to hide anything. Let's be absolutely clear about it. I'm just saying, stay on the scope, stay inside the scope. We had cases, fortunately not so many, but quite radical, when an organization mistakenly told the provider about some estate that was not licensed by them, was completely out of the scope of the audit. And then they spent months and months and months and back and forth, and even legal pushback to get that part of the infrastructure descoped, because the auditor just said, you have it, you must license it, and no arguments worked in that case. Rare case, may not be your case. Be aware of the possibility. Suddenly, if you're a service provider, disclose every single collocation hosting, and then you have to push back and fight back and explain and provide evidence that that is outside of scope. Just don't even include it in scope. Very high level, explanatory, if you want to, if it's absolutely necessary, if you deem it's absolutely necessary. Nothing more. No inventory data, no scans, nothing. It's outside of scope. That's it. So don't overshare it at the kickoff, and don't overshare it at any stage. Because then there's the data gathering stage. And again, the question we get often is, can we give them data from our tools? It's a bit kind of like, I'm going off tangent, but it's an FAQ. Yes, you can if the data is good enough, if the coverage is correct. So what we find with a lot of software asset management tools is that, yeah, the data may be good, but the coverage is 70% or something like that. That's unacceptable. And auditors will not accept. I can't promise, but let me put it this way. In over 100 audits, an auditor has never accepted a partial coverage from a tool like Snow or ServiceNow. If there's partial coverage, you're falling back to their scripts. And they will give you scripts, and you will have to run those scripts. And those scripts will collect certain pieces of data. Again, do not overshare. Make sure, especially relevant to service providers, but also multinationals, which may have environments out of scope, some connected environments that are not yours. So only run those scripts in the scope of the audit, in the agreed scope. Don't accidentally, if you're a service provider, give them inventory from end clients on-premises machines connected to the same Active Directory. It happens. So reduce your work. Reduce your potential exposure to at least questions. I'm not even saying penalty calculations. And only scan what's necessary, what they ask you to do. Be conservative. Don't undershare deliberately, but put controls on oversharing. And one of the mistakes that are made at this stage, a business critical mistake, is to, because nobody wants to deal with an audit, do you? Is to give the auditor a technical contact inside the organization. A techie that is not aware of licensing risks, that is in his mind, is rewarded for providing data to the auditor in the best way possible. Every time in our experience, when a techie without business understanding, I'm not saying every techie is bad, but if somebody without not business minded, mid-level, low-level technical expert was assigned to an audit as the only point of contact at the data gathering stage, mistakes were made. Massive strategic mistakes that took months and months, if not years. One audit ran for 7 years because of that, to correct. You don't want to end up in that situation. So one point of contact, not a technical one. And if it's a technical one, we're talking about the CIO level. Somebody who understands the risks, who can be accountable and responsible for data gathering and data sharing. So careful with that. At this point in time, the accuracy of scans, the accuracy of the scope is your defense. What I want to say, again, repeat, before you send any data, before you share any data, review it internally yourselves. Obviously, we can't legally advise you to fix anything. However, we believe that if there are honest mistakes, so for example, somebody by mistake added the entire organization as users of a certain service where only 100 people were supposed to be added as users. And in reality, only 100 people uses it. But Microsoft, if they see that the entire organization is an authorized user, will raise this and will attempt to penalize you for that, to recover the revenue. So before you release the data, check whether somebody made a stupid mistake, an honest and stupid mistake, and decide whether you want to correct it before releasing this data, or you want to go to the negotiation stage and have a negotiation with Microsoft where we would explain why this happened. Because the auditor, when they receive this data, will include it in the report. They will not remove it from the report. They will not skip it because it's not in their remit. They saw a technical configuration, they put it in the report. That's it. They may add your comments, and we'll talk about this, about your comments now. But if it's still there, if it's a stupid mistake, you may be compelled to pay for it or go into a very unfavorable alternative commercial resolution. So decide for yourselves. And if you're not in an audit, check your estate now for honest and stupid mistakes. Sorry, I keep saying that, and fix them now before even receiving a notice. Additional data may be requested, especially for service providers, which in forms of customer contracts, because they want to know, and that's a good thing, by the way, they want to know when you started serving a certain client, when you deployed or brought in certain service into your infrastructure. It's maybe less important for end users, but however, change records may be important. We just had a question from an auditor that they saw that a certain client only licensed a service in hypothetically, I'll give you hypothetical dates, February 2025, when the server was deployed in November 2024. And they asked for an explanation of why, what happened in between. And if a customer has change records to show that the production date was actually February, and before that, for various reasons, it was still in the deployment phase and it was actually not used, it still should have been licensed, but it puts you in a better position when you're discussing any historical non-compliance. So change records are important. For service providers as well, license verification forms an old thing, still a thing for many providers who continue following the old process of verification of licenses that end users brought to service provider estate. If you have those forms, it's a good time to provide them to the auditors, because that will reduce your exposure if you're a service provider. Then the next phase Let's go to the next phase. So, yeah, additional data collection. Auditors come in the first report is always a draft with a lot of open questions. They will come back, they will ask for additional data. Again, don't overshare, be vigilant at every step. Make sure that you're only sharing the data that benefits you, or the data that is absolutely necessary. It may not necessarily benefit you, but it's absolutely necessary. You can't complete an audit without it, and only share that data. And again, run it through a responsible and accountable person first. And if you hire somebody like us, we will review that data for you. Then the auditors go back and they analyze the report. You really can do nothing about it. And this process can take like 2-4 weeks, longer, months sometimes. We've seen 6 months, auditors not coming back and not being completely unresponsive, having chased the client before that for weeks and weeks and weeks, suddenly disappear, and it's all quiet. And then they come back. Everybody's forgotten about what was going on in the audit. And they come back and they're like, oh, we forgot to scan these 3 or 5 servers. It happens. Get ready for it. What you'll get is the first edition of the effective licensing position or an audit report. They can be called differently. In our industry, we use the acronym ELP, which is called effective licensing position. Everybody knows this acronym. You can easily use it with, in all the exchanges with the auditor instead of the word report. There will be assumptions, there will be errors. There will be. And I'm using the word will. Not may, not might, not could. There will be errors and assumptions. The first report, not the draft of a draft, the first report is always assumptive. There are things still uncovered. This is another chance for you to push back, review every single formula, every single calculation, whether they took installation dates into account, whether they took any other technical, not story, items into account, deployment dates for the service providers, and client onboarding dates. Check that it's there. In so many cases, it's not taken into account. These reports are still quite largely manual. So the data is put in by the scripts, maybe copied and pasted, and then the interpretation, the application of formulas is still done manually. And people doing this manually, they take shortcuts. They choose the easiest way, like modern day artificial intelligence as well. Not a big difference. I think AI is trained on our behavior. So challenge it. This is your another opportunity, and at this point, a lot can be challenged, and you have multiple attempts. There's no limit. Nobody can say we will only accept 3 editions. Where in the agreement is it stated? So push back, give additional information, clarify, find evidence, tell technical level stories, not like business excuses. If there are business excuses, make sure they capture them in so-called client or partner comments. Whether you're a client or Microsoft partner as a service provider, there'll be space in the report for comments. So provide those comments in writing. Even if the auditor doesn't accept the comments themselves affecting the outcome of their report, they must be included in the report. Let's move on. So effectively, this is your last line of defense with the auditor, where you can push back and provide additional data. For end users, it's a much easier exercise because you're just clarifying what licensing model is applied to a certain server, deployment, configurations of a certain server at a point in time. Usually, we're not talking about historical non-compliance. With service providers, there's much more at stake and much more that you can, may, should, and must use in your defense, as in proving the dates, changes of server configurations. For example, already probably 4 times in our recent experience, 2 last years, a provider changed CPUs in servers without buying new servers, just upgraded the CPUs. And the auditors that only have the current snapshot of data extrapolated that quantity of server cores back for the entire audit period. And the provider had to find invoices and change records to explain why they reported half the licenses 2 years ago. So this is when you find all those intricacies, all these misconfigurations, discuss them with the auditor, provide the evidence, and push back until you get to a point where the report is good enough. It's rarely ideal, it's rarely perfect, but you reach a point where there's nothing else can be done. Still, very important stage. The first most important stage is understanding the scope and not oversharing. The second important stage is pushing back on the results of the analysis. Because when the auditors go away and it goes to Microsoft, yes, Microsoft may reopen the ELP if your challenges are massive and if you're questioning the process, how the auditor performed the audit. But it happens rarely. Normally, they would be reluctant because it means paying more to the auditor. And if you are found compliant or not as much non-compliant as like 5% of the overall licensing estate, then Microsoft has to cover the auditor's fees. Do they want to? It's a big question. So they don't like reopening this. They don't like additional auditor fees. So make sure that you finalize every technical thing, every comment, everything with the auditor. And make sure that your comments are included in the final report. And then you say goodbye to the auditor and you say, hello, Microsoft. There's a 3-way meeting. You talk, you have a discussion, a handover discussion, where Microsoft may say questions, may ask you questions around, are you happy with the report? Don't tell them you're happy. Say that, you've done it to the best effort possible, and let's move on to the commercial negotiation. I would advise you against the thing I see the corporations do in those audits, where there'll be a clever person in the room who would say, I know how Microsoft works. Let's not go through all these discussions. Let's not challenge this. And let's just discuss our positions with them. So in the extreme case, I've seen an organization starting Microsoft's discussion with $250 million as opposed to potentially 40 million if they did the proper exercise of challenging the report. It's a no-brainer. Think about that. Are you more comfortable discussing an overinflated and incorrect $250 million or 40 million, which are clarified? Put yourself in a more comfortable position. Negotiations is always an art of asking for more and getting less. When you start from here, you will not end up here. You will end up somewhere here where it could have been your starting point if you did all the previous steps correctly and you did the proper technical, conducted the technical phase properly. And I have no more slides today, so let me switch back to a different view. And then comes the negotiation phase. And that's where you need a really good professional negotiator, either on your team or from the outside. And we've seen successes in both scenarios. We've seen cases and failures as well. We've seen cases when there's an internal negotiator very strongly skilled, understands the zone of possible agreement, best desirable outcome, least desirable outcome. Remember that the report is not the final sum that you will pay. But before you go into a resolution, before you go into, okay, how we're going to resolve and pay the penalties, your first phase of the negotiation must be to negotiate the actual sum from which you then seek a resolution. as low as possible. And we helped organizations reduce the penalty that is the final penalty being discussed down by 90% during the negotiation phase, by telling the right story, by providing evidence, by explaining the business case, by bringing up strategic partnership. It all depends. At this stage, no one's situation is exactly the same. And at this stage, in the era of AI, I must tell you that AI only can help you with obvious stuff that it knows that it's in its knowledge base and it can derive from its knowledge base. To see the picture at the higher level, to even with potential AI advice, you still need a human, a wise person that would go through all this advice and data and everything and find the right buttons, which buttons to push, how to move figures on the chessboard. I can't underplay the importance of a human still in 2026 in the process of negotiation to be able to understand unknown unknowns. If you are unable to pay an external consultancy, find a strong negotiator on your team. Find somebody who understands the business. But don't just blindly pick somebody. That person needs to be briefed. They need to understand what happened. They need to understand the pushback points. And I'll give you one very important advice, which applies to service providers, but also to end user organizations. The report will always, and this is where the question of independence comes to play. The report will always only show your shortfalls. If you have surpluses of licenses, whether you're an end user organization or a service provider, you will never see those numbers on the report. And I would normally assume that if an auditor is independent, they should show both sides of the position. Microsoft's argument is, we don't know how your infrastructure changed, what happened in the past, so we can't accept your overpayments or extra licenses. You may push back. You may tell the story. You may bring up arguments. And the pushback from Microsoft will be hard. It's not easy. You will have to do that due diligence. You would have to take the report and calculate the surpluses, explain why they happened, find really good explanation, because a vague explanation won't work. And you can use it as one of the arguments. Your business case, mergers, acquisitions, things that affected your licensing position because it just happened so. You acquired a company that was under-licensed. Do you bear responsibility as the acquiring party? Yes. But can you push back and say, I'm sorry, this is just how it happened? Yes, you may use that as an argument. And absolutely, why don't you? So the negotiation stage can sometimes contribute to, I would say roughly, never did the statistics, but 60 to 70% of the success of the audit. Yes, there are audits where everything is won at the technical stage, because like a recent example, when a client ended up with the ELP that started from 400K and the final version was only 3,000 euro, they just paid the sum to Microsoft. Yeah, you can ask for an excuse not to pay and just say, let's close this. It's a harder resolution, so weigh your consequences and efforts. They just decided to pay that 3K, and the audit ended. There was no negotiation. There was no need for a long negotiation about the resolution. But in many cases, some is won during the technical stage. Some is won during the negotiation. And I'll repeat again, it doesn't matter when you start your audit defense exercise. Before the audit, during the initial phases, suddenly you understood that you want to push back at the very end. You can still win. Until it's a signed resolution, it's not yet the final sentence. But the earlier you start, the better the results will be. And on that note, let me check the comments. I need to drag this window to a different screen. I'm sorry. To check the comments. What do we have today? Do auditors only consider the product terms when determining licensing? Do they also use Microsoft's guidance documents like Microsoft 2025 Windows Server Licensing Guide? Difficult question. So in previous years, Microsoft would normally reject any guidance documents and say we can't accept it because the terms aren't product terms. It's changed recently, and you may refer to those documents because right now, to be honest, product terms is in a sorry state. And if there's a conflict between the guide and product terms, and there are some. So for example, in the Windows Server 2025 licensing guide, I have a video on this channel from a couple of years ago when they released the guidance from a year ago, a couple of years ago, because it's an old server. It was not released in 2025. It was released just slightly before. So they made mistakes. They actually made factual and numerical mistakes. And in that case, obviously, product terms takes precedence, not the guidance. But if there are cases that clarify product terms, but that are not outlined in product terms, yes, you may refer to this guidance. And again, nowadays, Microsoft licensing is in product terms, in the guidance documents, and also on the learn.microsoft.com, which is maintained on a daily basis by people that not necessarily know licensing. I will put it lightly, not necessarily know licensing. And there are factual mistakes on learn.microsoft.com. But in some cases, learn.microsoft.com has fresher information that is more relevant. So now you have to consolidate all that knowledge and push back. It's not that mission critical. So, but then in previous years, in discussions with there was a licensing group, or also called License Q. Funny enough, there's a company called License Q as well, which does Microsoft services like us, our friends. So the Microsoft's License Q department would normally always fall back to just the interpretations of the product terms themselves, and push back if there's anything contradicting in their own guidance documents. Okay. Thank you. Thanks everybody for being here with me today. I hope you'll join our next live sessions as well. So follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on YouTube. We talk about Microsoft. We don't sell Microsoft licenses, and therefore we're strictly on your side. And if you're from Microsoft watching this, I hope you learned something from it as well. How to behave yourselves. Thanks again, everyone. Thank you for your question, and I'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Wednesday, 3:00 p.m. UK time, or what is it? 10 a.m. Eastern time zone. So yes, should be in the United States. All the best. I hope you learned something useful today, and yeah, take care. Goodbye.